together, and that was never a threat. Like, yeah, go and cuddle with your friends who you love. That's totally fine. And, same with me. And I always like describing it this way. Like, there's sometimes these activity friends that you have, right? And that's the thing that you do with them. You're their tennis buddy, or you're their workout buddy, or
you're the movie friend.
Yeah, exactly. And they may not be who you confide in about your relationship issues, or who you go to if you have questions about work, but they're no less valuable than your confidant or your colleague who you go to about work problems, etc. And nobody can wear all of those hats, right? That's ridiculous. You would never ask that of any of your friends. And so we've got this idea where, especially with a romantic partner, they're supposed to be your everything. They're supposed to be your best friend and confidant and like lover and all of these things. And so I was really lucky that was an idea that I had kind of worked towards debunking for my own sake much earlier on. And so it was really natural for multiple people to be involved. And it's just so happened that, 3 of those primary people, especially during the early part of my care, was 2 of my 2 partners and my partner's partner.
Mm-hmm. The way that things played out, it's, you had support from both of your partners and your partner's partner. I mean, that to me sounds a lot like how a family would function. Right. And that's
Absolutely.
how you would call, your partners and your partner's partner. Like, that is your family.
Yes.
How did that compare with your biological family and how they were involved?
So, and let me preface this. I love my family. I really do. And I'm working on building better relationships with all of them, as well as I try to do a lot of work finding my own self, which has been an interesting journey that's catalyzed, I think, a lot from by the challenges I've had with Jeff and also with this recovery process. I'm an only child, so that's also some context about my relationship with my folks.
Setting boundaries with Asian parents can be tricky. Lindsay didn't want her mom to worry, and so held off on informing her right away. Only a few days later, once the situation was no longer urgent, did she send her mom a picture of a slightly less busted up Lindsay with a story of what had happened and reassurances that she was fine. But, as anyone might imagine, her mom was not reassured and took matters into her own hands. Lindsay's mom and her stepdad live a 5-hour drive away. On the weekend after her accident, a tornado was blowing through the area, and in the middle of this raging storm, Lindsay received a text from her mom telling her they were 90 minutes away.
I'm freaking out. I'm pissed off. And I'm livid at that point. And I actually think that might be at a point where I didn't necessarily know I had a concussion. And, there are symptoms afterwards from a concussion that do affect mood, right? And mood control and all of that. So who knows how much of that was because of the concussion in terms of my reaction. Was it an overreaction? Probably a little bit. But I still think, looking back now with, kind of a lens of impartiality, that it was at least somewhat justified that I freaked out about this.
Right, because the other thing is that she didn't tell you before she left, you know, at a point where you could have said, no, don't come. Yeah. But it was 90 minutes away, where it was like already, she's like 85% of the way to you.
Driving through a tornado. She's driving through a tornado.
So now it's too late to go back.
My stepdad is driving through a tornado. Okay, so Jeff and I have a bit of a tete-a-tete, and I'm like, I can't do this, but obviously she's on her way, and, okay, I will make 5 minutes for her, 10 minutes for her, whatever it is. Like, please, let's just make this go away, and deal with this as best as we can.
Now, I just want to ask, was there anything specific about that situation, aside from the fact that you weren't prepared to receive your mom at that time, that made it more stressful?
It was just such an intrusion, right? So like you said, it's not, I wasn't prepared for a visit, but I'm like, well, fuck this. I don't want to deal with your anxiety right now. I'm trying to manage my own shit. It's just not this is an extra thing on my plate. No, stop. Please stop.
Right,
Please go away.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm sure that from your perspective right now, you can see why she, as your mother, felt the need to do that, right?
Absolutely, right? I'm her only child. She's been told that she was in a bike accident.
You're all busted up. You're missing a tooth.
The thing is with me, let me backtrack slightly. I really love my therapist. Also, shout out to, mental health workers out there who are amazing at their jobs. And one thing that I've been working on for the last little while, last maybe two years plus, is just figuring out my own boundaries. And that's part of discovering my own self and being grounded in myself and not get so absorbed in other people's worlds so much. And I think looking back, my mom and I, we never really established those boundaries. Because I didn't know where my boundaries were and how to hold them with her, right? So her visit isn't, not that something like this acute has necessarily happened before, but I'm sure it's just a shadow of all of the other instances where boundaries were traipsed upon, and so it's, I understand it, and then I think once I had a better understanding of exactly what it was that was making me really upset and able to articulate it to her afterwards and apologize for the terrible way that I treated her, we're able to move on from that experience and also learn from it and say, hey, this is what I'm trying to do. I want you in my life in a way that makes both of us comfortable, but these are where I draw my lines. And so if you can help me within that framework, then we can build a better relationship. So it was a really instructive visit. She did only stay for, I think, 15 minutes. Jeff made it quite clear to her at the door, that Lindsay will chat with you for 10-15 minutes. You can go see her and see for yourself that she's alive and touch her to make sure she's all in one piece. and yeah, so we navigated it. And when she left, Jeff told me afterwards, and he still chokes up when he tells me this. We were talking about this not too long ago. My mom was saying to him, well, Lindsay and I have some issues that we're working through and communication things, but, you're a really good husband. And it's right. She's right. It's so true. And so she can recognize the support that I'm getting from my partner. And yeah, so that was an interesting experience.
Yeah.
I held my boundary and she respected it, and they drove back the next day. But it was probably a good while later that we talked about it, when I was able to calm down a bit and then have that conversation with her calmly and explain what had happened. I think this was the first experience I had where I actually held my boundary. It wasn't the best way to do it, but I held it and we just moved on from it afterwards. And it was really instructive.
Yeah. Tell me more, because I'm so fascinated by this idea of boundaries. That's something that I've been working on for a very long time. And I think something that's especially relevant for children of Asian parents, whether they're third culture or otherwise. How specifically have you learned to navigate boundaries with your parents?
With my mom, it's just being straight with her. And it's funny because Jeff and I, for a really long time, and he's met my family and knows the nuances of everything. In fact, I'm sure you would have a fascinating conversation with him about him being kind of an outsider, cis white male, observing, the dynamics of everything. And he's told me as much. It is how do I say? Yeah, it's being okay with my own discomfort of maybe making my mom uncomfortable, I think, is the first step. Because I do want a good relationship with her. One of the things I realized, like I was saying earlier when I talked about this visit of hers, is I don't want to manage her anxiety. That's her problem and her journey, and I'm happy to walk with her. And I think a good example is actually when I came out to her about being poly, and then also the challenges I've been having with Jeff, and I have this other partner who's really lovely and wonderful, and I think I'm moving in with him, et cetera, et cetera. That kind of conversation was scary. There's a part of me, I think, that still doesn't want to disappoint my parents and disappoint my family, and that's pretty ingrained. I think that's just through upbringing, through respect your elders, et cetera. So I knew it was going to be uncomfortable because my lifestyle isn't going to be something that she quote unquote approves of or understands even, right? So holding those boundaries with my mom is not only confronting what's uncomfortable for her, but what's uncomfortable for me, which is this fear of her reaction or whatnot. But then I did it, when I came out to her, and it was fine. It was more than fine. And it's funny because what I was going to say earlier is Jeff has always kind of helped me navigate my relationship with my mom. And he's observed that she can be quite anxious, and I don't disagree with that assessment. But I think there was a lot of not giving her credit for being able to take information a certain way. And so just the way that we would interact with her, especially if the two of us were visiting my family in my hometown, or I guess her hometown, it was always censoring, in some ways. Mm-hmm. And I had a conversation with Jesse kind of probably around the same time about like, what do I do with my mom? How do I come out with her to her, etc. And he was like, she's a grown woman with her own lived experience, and she can probably handle it. And just having that extra perspective of, oh yeah, like let's give her some credit, mm-hmm. and let's all be adults here and not try to manage her. And that was a really eye-opening perspective, because when I actually took advantage of that and sat down and had a conversation and not come with expectations of what she was going to say or how she was going to react, mm-hmm. like you can actually have a connecting conversation a lot better. And Jesse's right. Like, she has lived through a bunch. She immigrated here. She lost a child. I had a sister. I was 3, and my sister lasted all of, I think, a week or so before she succumbed to SIDS. So, like, that's traumatic.
Wow. I didn't know that. I don't, maybe you told me, but I might not have remembered.
And it's not something that I think of very much, because I do always say that I'm an only child, but that's not her reality, right? Like, she would have been in her 30s, like early 30s when she had my sister. Like, I can't imagine losing a child. Then one should never lose a child. And so I think a lot of, my dynamic with her, not having known it until my therapist and I started digging deep into some of my childhood, she has her own strength and resilience that I don't think I gave her credit for or didn't see because of my own interactions with her.
Yeah. And this is a really great point, is that sometimes as children who are also adults, like, you and I are in our 30s, we start to...
I pretend to be an adult. I don't think I'm actually an adult, but yes, I understand.
I know. What does that actually mean anyway,
I don't know.
Like, you're taking care of your car and I'm taking care of my bike, so I guess we're both adults,
Yeah, exactly. So... Paying my bills. Good.
Yeah, exactly. Paying the bills, don't owe the man nothing. So there, adults. So I think this is really important to remember, is that sometimes we as adults, we feel like we're the only ones who have ever been through any kind of shit, any kind of difficult experience. And we forget that our parents, whether they were immigrants or any other kind of, people, that life is full of these kinds of crazy experiences. And even if they don't talk about it, they're full of resilience themselves, right? They wouldn't be where they are today if not for that. And that's something that I'm trying to remember for me as well, is that I often do this. I try to manage the reactions of my family members, but it's mainly because I can't stand their anxiety. It's not because I don't think they can't handle their anxiety. It's because I don't want to deal with it.
And it's challenging to come back to this as a quote-unquote adult because of all of the habits and the just the interaction patterns we've had growing up, right? Like Jeff and I used to joke, every 100 kilometers closer back to visiting my family, I would revert 5 years. And so by the time by the time we've arrived on my mom's doorstep, I'm 16 again and angsty, maybe 12 and angsty.
Right.
And it's true. Like, there is that context where, I've spent so much more of my adult life here away from my family that I haven't actually continued that relationship in a cohesive way, I think. And so it's like all of a sudden I'm like, oh shit, like, we're all adults now. Okay. How do I reprogram the patterns that I've had of interaction from when I was younger? Because some of those were not the healthiest.
Back on the topic of not taking on somebody's anxiety and not doing the emotional labor for them, what do you think is the amount of reassurance that's reasonable to have with the parent-child relationship? Because we can't expect that people are never anxious or fearful. That's just, I think that's just a normal thing.
Yeah, that's a human thing. I think I would reframe it. I would try to reassure someone that I'm there with them, right? Like, I'm happy to walk by their side through their own journey of anxiety and be there, and they know that they can lean on me. But that work, like the actual dealing with the anxiety, the root of it, that is not for me to fix. And I can say this from my own experience, because my own fears and anxieties that I've